Appreciate you streaming in on game day here on Birds 365. Bill Colarulo and for John McMullen, Jody Mack here with you. We've got BLG with us. Brandon Lee Gowton from Bleeding Green Nation. BLG, I said top of the show that 15 days we've been waiting for this. Seems more like a month and a half. But it has finally arrived, game day on the road. They've got to go into Kansas City, take on the Chiefs. That's why I think the Chiefs are a 2.5-point favorite. If this was here in Philadelphia, I think the Eagles would be a 2.5-point favorite or a 3-point favorite. How much of an advantage is it tonight for Kansas City to be playing in front of a hometown crowd in KC? It's over the years been one of the best home field advantages in football. How much are the Eagles going to have to fight the crowd tonight in Kansas City, you think?
It's a big deal. Typically, the Eagles go out and they have a lot of fans in the opposing stadium, and it's almost like a home game on the road in a lot of cases. I expect there will be, a decent amount of midnight green there at Arrowhead Stadium there, but it's going to be a tough place to play. Chiefs have one of the best home field advantages in the NFL. Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid, they typically win a lot. So as if it wasn't already a big challenge. Also, obviously, we all know Andy Reid coming off the bye. It's a very tough task.
What's up, Brandon? How you doing, brother?
How's it going?
Not too bad, man. Nice to meet you. I don't think we've ever had an opportunity to talk before, so it's good.
Likewise, yes.
So you mentioned Andy Reid. You mentioned Patrick Mahomes. Everybody thinks of the Chiefs, and they think of this high-powered offense. But that's not really how they're winning a lot of games this year. They're winning games because of that defense. How good is this Chiefs defense this season?
Yeah, it's all relative to expectation, right? I think the Chiefs offense is still, good and fine. It's just, you're not the Chiefs. They're not quite what you would usually expect from them. But yeah, the defense, look, no team has allowed fewer points in the league this season. So it's been like a huge improvement for them on that side of the ball. And I think, you look at how there are a lot of young players contributing to that defense last year. And I think they've suddenly become more experienced, and they've grown and they've developed. So I think you've seen the improvement there. Obviously, you have Steve Spagnuolo as a longtime defensive coordinator, coach in the NFL. He has an idea of what he is doing. Certainly came up with some very good game plans in the past. So I think, it's a unit really that, again, has gotten better as time has gone along. And they've had to pick up the slack here a little bit for an offense that hasn't been as good as it normally is. So, it's a legitimately successful unit.
And BLG, we can tell just by looking at the stats that the Eagles have the better wide receivers in this matchup. And it's not even close. My God, it's an overmatch between Eagles wide receivers and the Kansas City wide receivers. But they do have a tight end named Kelce, and the Eagles are going to be trying to figure out how to replace Dallas Goedert. And, oh, by the way, the Kansas City Chiefs spread the ball around. They're not dependent on one or two wide receivers. It seems like the same way the Eagles are. Does it really matter who catches the football? If it's concentrated to two guys or spread out over 9 guys, does it matter how we realize Patrick Mahomes has more passing yards than Jalen Hurts? You would say, well, Jalen's got the 2-star wide receivers. He does. Then how does Patrick Mahomes have more passing yards than Jalen Hurts? Kansas City does it spread out over a couple people. Is that an advantage or a disadvantage for Kansas City?
Again, I think it's, they're at a point where they can be functional. It's not like they have receivers out there who can't do anything at all. They're just not the same level of game breakers that you might be used to as we've seen in the past. So certainly going back a few years, Tyreek Hill being there. But certainly Travis Kelce is going to get his, or at least you would think he would, against an Eagles defense that has been vulnerable up the middle and just allowed Jake Ferguson to have a big day a couple of weeks ago, in addition to CeeDee Lamb. So it's definitely a concern. Rashee Rice has been doing nice things this year. Hasn't been necessarily, consistent, again, dominant wide receiver one like A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, but has made nice plays for that Chiefs offense. So, they have enough at the very least to be functional, especially when you have the quarterback that the Chiefs have. And they have the coaching staff that the Chiefs have, and also a running game that the Chiefs have that hasn't really been reliable enough to where they just have to pass in volume because they can't just merely rely on the running game.
It's funny. We all talk about this Chiefs offense, and you're right. They're still top 5 in the NFL in passing yards. So we're saying, they've taken a step back. Well, for them, they've taken a step back, but they still are one of the best passing teams in the league. But a way to combat that is what we thought the Eagles were going to be able to do in the Super Bowl, which was get after Patrick Mahomes. We know what happened in the Super Bowl. Let's not bring up that field. I don't even want to mention it. But this Chiefs team protects Patrick Mahomes better than anybody, number one in the league in giving up sacks. How are they doing it? Is it their offensive line? Is it just because of how shifty Patrick Mahomes is? But what do the Eagles need to do to try to get after him tonight?
Yeah, I think a lot of that goes on the quarterback himself. I mean, to some extent, I believe sacks are, quarterback stats there, where, Patrick Mahomes is just so elusive and hard to sack sometimes that I think he's making that offensive line look better than it's been. Certainly, the Chiefs are really strong on the interior there, but the tackles have really not been as good. And I think they really have been, again, bailed out by how Patrick Mahomes is able to avoid getting sacked. I think the Eagles do have, on paper, at least, just like they did in the Super Bowl, the advantage on the edges there with Josh Sweat and Hassan Reddick going up against the likes of the Chiefs' offensive tackles. So I feel like, in theory, they should be able to create some disruption on the edge. The key, of course, is that, okay, can Jordan Davis, can Jalen Carter, can Fletcher Cox, can they do anything on the interior to actually, capitalize on Patrick Mahomes if he has to step up and get to him in the pocket there? I will say, following along with the Chiefs coverage, and specifically at the Chiefs version of my site, which is called Arrowhead Pride, that's the Chiefs version of Bleeding Green Nation. They've been concerned about the Chiefs offensive line in recent weeks. They've actually said it's kind of been like, quote unquote, a total mess for them, even though that doesn't necessarily show up in the box score. Just the feel of some of these games, they haven't been totally dominating in the trenches like you would think, just looking at, some basic box score metrics. So I am kind of curious to see how that goes.
All right, BLG, we know we've got the MVP from last year versus the runner-up for MVP last year. And as of right now, the leader in the betting markets for MVP against the runner-up for the MVP in the betting markets in Mahomes and Jalen Hurts. We expect the ball to be flying around the field in Kansas City tonight, which means the game will probably be decided by whoever runs it best. And neither one of these teams have been great with the run. I thought Pacheco would have a better year in the second year after grabbing the job last year. He's been solid, not spectacular. DeAndre Swift was superior games 2 and 3. Hadn't done a whole hell of a lot since. I think there are a lot of reasons for that. If it comes down to who runs the ball better tonight, who do you like, Eagles or Chiefs?
I think Eagles better in that matchup. And I know their running game hasn't been what it was early in the year. Recently, you look at the past 4 games, Eagles only averaging 86.75 yards per game. But over the first 5 there, they had 164. And I think that's still in them. The Eagles are getting Cam Jurgens back. I don't think that's like the only difference between the run game being good and bad, but that certainly helps them get better there. It's kind of hard to totally project what Jalen Hurts is going to look like mobility-wise, but in theory, he's coming off the bye week. He's had extra rest, so maybe his legs are more of a factor than they've been recently. And you look at this Chiefs run defense. I mean, they rank 20th in run defense DVOA. They are 26th in opponent yards per carry this season, and they're missing their top linebacker, who was really a good player for them, has been a good player for them, but especially against the Eagles in the Super Bowl, where the Eagles could not really run the ball outside of Jalen Hurts. The running backs couldn't do anything in that game. So I actually think the Eagles rushing attack could get going here.
One of the things I'd really like to see get going, in addition to the rushing attack, is takeaways on defense. You look at this defense last year through the first 9 games, and they had 20 takeaways. So far this season, they only have 11. And as good as Patrick Mahomes is, as good as this Chiefs offense can be, they've turned the ball over a lot this season. Do you see the Eagles getting any turnovers tonight?
Feels like they're due. Some of that stuff is obviously just luck, bounce of the ball kind of things. And I think the Eagles haven't totally gotten that. No, you saw that a little bit more in terms of favorable bounces of the ball against the Cowboys. Obviously, that was going in their favor in that game, at least when it came to be holding on to their own fumbles. So I do think this Chiefs rushing attack, as I said, is not very effective, and the Eagles are so good at stopping the run. I think it does kind of make the Chiefs be one-dimensional. Now, again, the Chiefs are pretty good at that one dimension, at least, when you have Patrick Mahomes throwing back there. But, you ask him to throw maybe 50 times a game. Maybe you get lucky at some point where there's a tip ball, a big interception, you steal possession, and that could be the difference in the game.
All right, BLG, need your take on Bradley Roby, who's rejoining the Eagles lineup tonight. They pick him up off the scrap heap. Let's be honest, you sign a guy weeks into the season. He had all off season to sign. He didn't sign with anybody. It's the scrap heap. He's had a good, solid career as a slot corner. Comes in, plays very well week 1 against the Rams. They were killing him early on with passes to Cooper Kupp. And that was a really good job and performance he turned in. The next week, didn't give up much, but the Eagles lost to the Jets, and he goes down with an injury and hasn't been seen since. He's played all of 50 snaps for the Eagles this year, and he seems to be the savior at the slot corner position. And we know they need saving because the guys doing the job there, the asked to do the job there, have not been getting it done. You got faith in Bradley Roby's going to just slide right in and all will be well at the slot corner?
It's not about all will be well to me as much as he just gives you a level of credibility that the combination of your third string slot cornerback option is, undrafted rookie free agent in Eli Ricks and a third round pick in Sidney Brown. And neither of those guys are slot cornerbacks.
That's not playing out of position, right?
Both, and again, going back to training camp, guys weren't repping there. So to have them do that, that's a big ask. And look, again, I don't expect Bradley Roby to come in and light the world on fire, but can he come in and at least, and not have you get absolutely crushed by opposing slot cornerbacks? Yeah, I think that's reasonable to say that he can actually do okay or merely average or merely below average, as opposed to just not even being a real credible option there in the slot. So yeah, it's not about him being a star as much as it's just being a legitimate option there.
And along those same lines, we know what Travis Kelce can do. Who you putting on Kelce tonight? And maybe it's more than one person, but who you putting on Kelce tonight?
I think it's a kitchen sink kind of game in that regard. I mean, and look, we've seen Sean Desai, to his credit. I mean, there's a lot of things to criticize Sean Desai for, but to his credit, he has been willing to experiment with different options. I think kind of too late in the Cowboys game when it came to finally putting Darius Slay more so on CeeDee Lamb at one point late in the game there. But, I think part of the reason you trade for Kevin Byard is you have hope he might be able to go up against Travis Kelce. That's a matchup that Byard has been able to experience and handle in the past when the Titans have played the Chiefs. So there's some level of familiarity there on both sides. But I don't think it's as simple as you just put one guy in Travis Kelce and just be like, all right, you take care of him. Especially when, you're paying big money to Darius Slay and James Bradberry. At some point, you feel like, okay, maybe, especially if things aren't working with a certain option on Travis Kelce, and maybe that's Byard to start, then you have to adjust. You have to throw different things at him and see if something is able to work. And I think Sean Desai, again, to his credit, is willing to experiment with that. So I think we could see that.
You mentioned the Eagle corners not named Ricks and or Brett trying to play a position. It's not their position. Slay and Bradberry. Bradberry was a Pro Bowl level cornerback last year. He was phenomenal. This year, he's been taken advantage of and has not had a great year in coverage. Father Time just catching up. Couple of plays gone against him, could have gone either way. Sometimes, like I said, there's a little luck involved. But through the first half of the season, he has not graded out very well. Why do you think Bradberry's had to drop off?
I think there is some natural regression. He was just so good last year. He was not going to probably be that great again in 2023. Goes for a lot of, things going from last year to this year. But also, yeah, it is the nature of the position. Who are the cornerbacks in the NFL that, really age well? Or who are the top cornerbacks in the NFL right now? Do you see a lot of, plus 30 players in that list? It's not a position typically. Obviously, there are exceptions that age super gracefully. So I think that's a factor. I think it could be that you did move him around a little bit from the slot and the outside. I think that, might throw off his rhythm a little bit there. That's another factor to consider. I think you just have to look at the bigger context of the secondary as a whole, how they've only had one repeat starting lineup all season long prior to tonight's game, where, when you have so many different moving pieces in the secondary every single game, that certainly doesn't help the continuity there and the communication and things in that regard. So I think there's a lot of different reasons that go into that, but I still think like this isn't a player who I think is totally just fallen off a cliff and there's no hope for him the rest of the season. I think he could potentially bounce back after the bye week. Might not be the same player that we saw last year, but I think he can be better than what he was to this point.
And we keep talking about this Chiefs receiving core not being as great, but one of the things that surprised me when I looked was they're 29th in the league in yards before catch, meaning that Mahomes is not throwing the ball very far down the field, but they lead the NFL in yards after catch. Everybody loves to talk about yak. Chiefs do it better than anybody. What can this defense do, especially the secondary, to make sure they're not letting these receivers and especially Travis Kelce get that yak tonight?
I think part of that just goes into, leverage and playing things smartly. I mean, Mahomes he's such a talented passer from an accuracy standpoint, putting the ball in the position for these receivers to be able to run after the catch there. So some of that is just you can't do a whole lot about when you have a quarterback that good. Part of it is, gang tackling, obviously rallying to the ball, being disciplined in coverage, hopefully coming out of the bye, ironing out some of those issues when there's been, not being able to all be able on the same page, in part because there's been so many different secondary lineups this year. So I think a lot of different things ultimately go into that.
One of the guys who scares me coming into the game a little bit tonight from an Eagle perspective, and I know the stats that he put up this year say, what are you talking about? He hadn't done anything, Joe. The Eagles have not faced that many good receiving running backs out of the backfield. And Jerick McKinnon over the last couple of years has been one of the better guys to make plays, specifically in the red zone, down by the end zone, as far as catches go. Could Jerick McKinnon be a guy that causes the Eagles some problems? Because if you ask me, are the Eagles good at covering backs out of the backfield? My answer would be, I don't know. They haven't faced that many. Teams haven't attempted to make that many plays. I do know that their linebacker coverage in the past game has been spotty more against tight ends than running backs. Does Jerick McKinnon scare you at all coming into tonight's game, BLG?
I think it's a fair point. I didn't really think about that a ton, but I do think, if you're the Chiefs, you're looking to get your running backs matched up against these Eagles linebackers. So I definitely think that could be a factor. Zach Cunningham, I think, is coming off of a good game, but he's more of a guy who I think, we've seen have success downhill than he is. You really want him out in space in coverage. And obviously Nicholas Morrow has been in and out of the lineup here a little bit with Nakobe Dean prior to, him getting re-injured again. So certainly, not an all-star group of linebackers there. I do think, we could see the Chiefs try to attack that matchup. I don't think it'll be what decides the game, but I do think that could be a factor.
We've been talking about the defense a lot. Let's jump over to the offensive side of the ball for a second. One of the things that we were all complaining about to start the season was their red zone offense. They were near the bottom of the league. We've seen them get better every single week. They sit at number 12 now in the NFL. And you look at over the last 3 games, they're over 70% in the red zone. Are they just executing better, or did Brian Johnson make some changes in the red zone?
Yeah, I think the execution thing's huge. There was, some turnover issues there in the red zone, including when, they failed to get a tush push in from the 1-yard line at one point. That's just, kind of bad luck or fluky. You're not really going to be worried about that too much. But, I think on the whole, you look at red zone year to year, it's kind of something that a lot of people, who study statistics and whatnot say that's, not necessarily sustainable or can be a little bit fluky there. Small sample sizes and whatnot. So I think some of that Eagles' lack of red zone efficiency early on was just a matter of, it'll work out. And I had confidence it would get to, better than where it was early in the season, which I thought was just way too low. And now it's coming back up, as you said, to more a respectable number. I expected that with just the amount of talented players that they have. One thing that I didn't like about the red zone offense earlier in the year, it's just like a weird decision to not really throw into the red zone a lot. Like they would just seem to like always try to throw short of the red zone and try to get in from there, as opposed to just actually maybe put the ball into the end zone and have the players catch it in there. What a novel concept. So they do seem to ultimately have adjusted in that regard. I almost wonder if Brian Johnson's getting like enough credit for that, the way he was getting, because he was getting hammered for that earlier in the year.
True.
Like you said, it has improved a lot. So not to say Brian Johnson has been perfect, but I think we've seen signs of progress from him, and that's one of them.
All right, BLG, both Johnny Mack and I have taken similar stances to why the Eagles' running game has dropped off from where it was the first couple weeks of the season. Swift was great. Weeks 2 and week 3, not near as good since. And both John and I theorized that a big part of that is Jalen is not that +1 factor that he was last year. And even early this year, we assume that his knee is better, and he's saying that his knee is better. Is there anything you'll see tonight? He makes a run early on. Will you watch him run out there on the field? No, you're not a doctor. You can't look at x-rays. We're all going to be guessing at home as we best we can. Would it be a tip-off that Jalen Hurts is close enough to 100% that he should be taken as a threat by the Kansas City defense that he could run the football tonight?
I mean, I'll have to see it in game action, multiple times to truly believe it. Because I think he can run. I mean, even you saw against the Cowboys there, really the big run on third down early in that third quarter after he goes down with the scare late in the second quarter there, where Micah Parsons actually didn't even respect his ability to run at all, and he was able to scoot out for a first down. So I think even when he has been hurt, it's like he can do it if he absolutely has to and pick up a crucial first down, which is still good to have. But I don't think we've seen, the luxury running, I'll call it, where, he's doing it a little bit more gratuitously. And if he starts to do that a little bit here, I think that's when you'll start to truly believe, okay, he's actually back. He's feeling pretty good. He is healed. So until we see that, not going to fully believe it. I do agree, that his lack of mobility the same way has hurt the run game. But again, you've also been missing Cam Jurgens, so that's a factor. Now you have the bye week to evaluate things a little bit here and come up with a better running plan, so that could help as well. I do think the running game is going to bounce back to some extent. I can't believe it's going to be kept down as much as it has been recently.
One of the things that bothered me about the running game, and we talked a little bit about Brian Johnson getting some heat for the red zone, but one of the things that's bothered me with his play calling, and I do think he's doing a good job, but I don't think they're giving the ball to the running backs enough. And if you look at over the last few games outside of that Dallas game, running backs are not getting a lot of carries, and especially not getting a lot of carries early in the first half to allow them to get into any sort of rhythm. So I went and looked at this Chiefs defense. As good as they've been, they're not great against the run. You mentioned it earlier. And you look at their 2 losses. In their 2 losses, the opposing teams gave their running backs over 30 carries on average. In their 7 wins, running backs only had 17 carries on average. Do you think we're going to see our running backs tonight get the ball a lot, or is it going to be more of the same?
They should. I mean, this is a game where, I'm not always the run the ball guy, but in this game, I really think that is a matchup that favors them. And, look, it's tough because, when you have A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith on offense, and you have a quarterback who, is conceivably in the MVP conversation, it's tough to just say, don't throw the ball. But when it comes to this specific matchup, I think it's what favors the Eagles best here. And DeAndre Swift, I think, even he hasn't been the same player quite that he was earlier on in the year. I still think he hasn't shown enough juice where he can still give you a lot of value there. I have not loved the Eagles' usage of Kenny Gainwell this year. I think they've overused him in a lot of spots. I know he had that touchdown run against Dallas. That's nice. But I think on the whole, there's been a lot more bad than there has been good. So I don't really love him having a big role. I'd kind of like to see more of a split behind DeAndre Swift between Gainwell and maybe actually getting Boston Scott a little bit involved, a few carries, mix him in. I'm guessing Rashad Penny's going to go back to being a healthy scratch. I think that's kind of a mistake because I think he's a talented runner and should be involved here as well. We'll see for sure when the inactives come out tonight. But yes, they absolutely should be running or leaning on the run game in this one.
All right, BLG, they'll kick it off tonight about 8:15. If you had to say going into the game, there was an advantage for the coaching matchup, not just head coach on head coach, but staff against staff, Eagles staff against Kansas City staff. Is there a coaching advantage?
I mean, you have to give the benefit of the doubt to the Chiefs side. I mean, they not only just the track record of experience, but I mean, they outcoached the Eagles in the Super Bowl earlier this year on both sides of the ball. So, yeah, I mean, they absolutely have that advantage. Now, I think it's not like obviously the Eagles side they have total buffoons on their side. I think Nick Sirianni and his staff deserve a lot of credit, and you can't just say they're not good at all. But I mean, when it comes to who has the edge here, you have to give it to the Chiefs.
And you talk about the coaching staff, a lot different in philosophies between these defensive coordinators. You look at Sean Desai, Eagles are 26 in the league in blitz percentage at about 22%, and Spagnuolo 6th in the league in blitz percentage, close to 34%. Do you expect more of that tonight, where Eagles will kind of sit back, not blitz a lot, and the Chiefs will come after Hurts?
Absolutely. I think, the Eagles offensive line is really good. It's not just about lining up against them and winning those one-on-one battles and counting on that all game long. It's about being able to do some things that maybe confuse this offensive line a little bit and create some opportunities to get to Jalen Hurts and really test how that knee is holding up and everything, and hit him and be physical and see how that goes there. So, yeah, I absolutely do think Spags will come up with a game plan here. And going back to the Super Bowl, and I know that you can't just trace everything back there and say it's going to be the same for this matchup, but I mean, a lot of the success the Eagles had was necessarily only because of good coaching. That's part of it for sure. But there was a lot of just plays made by key players. Specifically, Jalen Hurts was carrying a lot of weight in that game, including with his legs. If it's anything like that game, it's about, the players stepping up and not just what's going to be called schematically.
BLG, a lot will be made of the outcome of this game. And I'm banking on it being 59th minute plus when the game is decided, last minute. They're two evenly matched teams. They played all the way down to the wire in the Super Bowl last year. I think it's going to be the same thing again tonight. But whoever ends up with the most points is going to get a huge win here, because specifically here in Philadelphia, it'll be overreaction Tuesday. It's usually overreaction Monday. If the Eagles win, basically everyone will be saying, all right, what date is that parade going to be again? If the Eagles lose, it'll be panic central that, oh my God, we just got by and this team isn't that good. And we finally play a real team and the Chiefs, we lose. How big a swing is it if the Eagles win or lose this game in the pulse of the city?
It's a great question, because I think narratively this game is, as you're saying, is very important. But, in the standings, it doesn't even matter like a ton.
Man, it's less than a division game or a conference game.
AFC game. It does matter from a standpoint, kind of sneakily, that there's a common games tiebreaker in the conference standings where, the Detroit Lions have already beaten the Chiefs this year. So that could potentially come into play, but, it's a little too early to definitely look at that. So it could matter in that regard. But again, for the most point, from a standing standpoint, it's one of the least impactful games the Eagles have this year. And I think it's kind of funny, the gap between the narrative and the actual meaning of the game itself in the numbers, the statistical value of it. So I think that's funny to point out. But yeah, I mean, it's absolutely a measuring stick kind of performance here, especially when you're going up against the team that you couldn't beat in the Super Bowl last season. I think it's huge, and I think it will go. You basically laid it out. You answered the question for me, Jody, there, where it's like, oh, if you can't beat this team, they're not even that good. And if you do, well, then you're going to be on top of the NFL. I mean, this is like the power rankings decider here, right? Between 1 and 2. If there's no one who's not going to have the Eagles number 1 in their power rankings, if they don't already, after this game, if they win.
And anytime there's a good matchup between two quarterbacks, we always talk about the quarterback versus the quarterback, Mahomes versus Hurts. But the reality is they're not on the field at the same time, right? So what matchup tonight are you looking forward to the most between the Eagles and the Chiefs?
I think maybe this is too easy of an answer, but like, this Eagles team, I think my biggest concern with them this year has not been about ever like this other team that they're playing is going to beat them, just flat out beat them. I think the issue is that they're too good sometimes at beating themselves or making things way harder than they have to for themselves. Now, if there is a team that can just flat out beat them, I do think, yes, the Chiefs are one of those, but I worry more not so much about that than I do the Eagles just, continuing to have these turnover issues, which have plagued them for a lot of the season, to continue to, be in these late game scenarios, which has happened multiple times, including their most recent performance, where, you have a team pinned deep and you allow them to come back into the game and almost win the game. In this case, last week, and then earlier in the season, I was Washington when they forced overtime. So I just think, if they can actually take advantage of this bye and get right and self-scout a little bit and make some adjustments and, again, get some more luck too when it comes to the turnover thing there. I just think that if they can figure it out and if they can just avoid beating themselves, then I really like their chances.
All right. The Chiefs, as we've mentioned a couple times, Bill brought it up, only 12 sacks all year. They've done as good a job protecting their quarterback, and their quarterback does as good a job of protecting himself as anybody in the game. He gets the ball out of there, and he just is elusive, and he doesn't get pulled down. But their interior offensive line is better than their exterior. Their tackles are good.
Mhm.
They're not great. Their interior is pretty damn great. Speed off the edge. We know his son Reddick wants to make up for the fact that he didn't get a sack in last year's Super Bowl. It's supposed to be raining in Kansas City today. We'll find out what the field is like come game time. On the other side, Nolan Smith. They've already counted Derek Barnett out for tonight for personal reasons. Love to know what those personal reasons. At least they didn't try and cover it up last week. They just said healthy scratch. So I'm assuming it means some more snaps for Nolan Smith. He hadn't been getting a whole hell of a lot. I get it. When you got Josh Sweat and Hassan Reddick, you're reticent to pull them off the field. Is tonight a night where Nolan Smith can get kind of like make his chops, get a big sack against the Kansas City Chiefs in a big spot if he gets some extra snaps, BLG?
I do think there's reason to believe he could have a bigger role. In that game you mentioned there where Barnett was a healthy scratch right before the bye, we didn't actually see much of an uptick for Nolan Smith's playing time, but I do think that was kind of a unique circumstance where it's kind of like an empty the tank game for Hassan Reddick and Josh Sweat because you have the bye coming up, so you're kind of just going to rely on them more than you typically would, knowing that you have that extra rest right around the corner, whereas opposed to now you're on the other side of the bye. And I think it's more about, managing those snaps a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think Nolan Smith could be more involved. I also think he's a player specifically that you could kind of self-scout during the bye week and say, hey, some of these kind of like creative things we've been trying to do with him in terms of dropping into coverage and whatnot haven't really been working out too well. Maybe we should just kind of let's go back and simplify it a little bit and allow him to just rush the passer. So I do think he could have, a nice little role there as a backup edge defender, and I do think he could play a little bit more than he has been.
All right, BLG, we haven't gotten you on the record yet. I don't know if you've even put a pickup on Bleeding Green Nation. If you have, my apologies for not seeing it this morning. If you're telling me you're holding off till you put it up on the site, I guess we got to be okay with that. But if you want to give us a number, give us a number. If not, just give us a feel on how tonight's game's going to go.
Maybe it's the contrarian to me, but I don't want to go along with everyone else saying, and I get why you do. It's certainly logical that it's going to be another close game. I'm going to say the Eagles win this by 2 scores. I think it's a game they control. I think it's close-ish towards maybe middle of the fourth quarter, and they come out with one of those signature drives that they have that kind of just eat a lot of clock, and they move the ball down the field. They score a touchdown. They go up 38-28, and they don't look back from there. They win this game.
Well, that's one thing you and I agree on. I think it's going to be a high-scoring game. Some people are saying, I think the under is 9-1 in Monday Night Football this year. For some reason, they're low-scoring Monday night games. I think it's going to be high-scoring, just like the Super Bowl last year. One of the two teams are playing into the 30s, and I wouldn't be surprised if both played into the 30s again. And BLG's got them winning handily. Brandon, we appreciate whatever you hop on. Thank you much. We'll certainly be checking out Bleeding Green Nation in the morning after the game. Thank you for jumping in with us today.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, BLG.
Brandon Lee Gowton, Bleeding Green Nation, here with us on Birds 365. All right, Bill Colarulo in for Johnny Mac. We may or may not be getting Johnny Mac up from KC. There's some hotel Wi-Fi issues. If we can, we're certainly going to punch him up. If not, BC and I will be kicking it around again. And we will add Mark Farzetta to the mix in hour number 2. Mark Farzi's here every day with the Farzi Show, of course, but we haven't had him on Bleeding Green Nation in, I think, more than a month. So Farzi definitely going to be part of hour number 2. Keep it here on Birds 365.
Go to get your game